You know you should be studying, and that is exactly what makes this so frustrating. The problem is not that you forgot about the exam, and it is not that nobody warned you. The exam is on the calendar, the deadline is getting closer, the material is sitting there waiting for you, and somehow you still end up doing almost anything except opening it. You scroll for a few minutes, then watch a video, organize your files, clean your desk, make a study plan, check your email, look up something unrelated, and before you know it, another evening disappears. And if exam season is starting where you are right now, this probably feels very familiar. Every year around this time, the same thing happens. Deadlines become real, exams move from being a distant future problem to an immediate one, and suddenly a lot of students discover that they have absolutely no desire to look at the material they know they should be studying. I started thinking about this recently because I noticed the exact same pattern in myself. The closer an exam gets, the more attractive everything else becomes. Organizing notes feels productive, making schedules feels productive, watching videos about studying feels productive, and somehow even thinking about studying starts feeling easier than actually studying. Which is strange because none of those things are actually the thing you are worried about. The exam is. Most people explain this with a single word: laziness. I do not think that explanation survives contact with reality. Because if you truly did not care, you would not feel guilty. You would not keep thinking about the exam while avoiding it, and you would not get that uncomfortable feeling every time you remember how little time is left. A lot of students care very deeply, and that is exactly why studying becomes difficult. Studying does something that most avoidance strategies never do. It turns uncertainty into information. Before you open the material, everything is still blurry. Maybe you are behind, maybe you are fine, maybe you remember more than you think, maybe you can still catch up later, and maybe the exam will not be as bad as it seems. As long as the book stays closed, all of those possibilities remain alive. The future stays uncertain, and uncertainty has a strange advantage because it allows hope to survive without evidence. The moment you actually start studying, that changes. Now the material starts answering questions. Questions you were not necessarily excited to ask. How much do I actually know? How much have I forgotten? How much work is left? How bad is the situation really? And sometimes the answers are uncomfortable. You open a chapter and realize you barely remember it. You try a practice question and discover that you have no idea where to begin. You look at the syllabus and realize there is more material left than you thought. The exam did not become worse. You just stopped guessing. That is why I think many students are not avoiding studying. What they are really avoiding is finding out where they actually stand. Because once you know, the situation becomes real, and reality is much less flexible than imagination. Imagine someone who avoids stepping on a scale for months. The number does not suddenly appear when they look at it. The number was already there. Looking at it simply removes uncertainty. Now they know where they stand. And studying works exactly the same way. Opening the material does not create the problem. It simply reveals what was already there. And revealing a problem is emotionally uncomfortable, which is exactly why avoidance feels so attractive. Not because it solves anything, but because it temporarily protects you from reality. You decide not to study tonight and the anxiety drops a little. That relief feels good, and your brain immediately remembers it. So the next time anxiety appears, your brain quietly suggests the same solution. Avoid again. The problem is that avoidance only works in the short term. The exam keeps moving closer, the material stays exactly where it was, and nothing changes except the amount of time remaining. Eventually, something strange happens. The thing that could reduce your anxiety becomes the thing you are avoiding because of your anxiety. That is the trap. And once you fall into that cycle, a whole category of fake productivity starts appearing. You reorganize your notes, redesign your schedule, watch videos about studying, search for better techniques, compare productivity apps, and clean your workspace. You spend so much time preparing to study, that preparation quietly becomes a substitute for studying itself. Everything looks responsible, everything looks productive, and everything looks like progress. Except for one thing. The material is still closed. At some point, preparation stops being preparation, and becomes avoidance wearing a disguise. Preparation feels safe. Exposure does not. Exposure means opening the chapter, attempting the question, discovering gaps, and finding out that reality may not match your assumptions. And your brain would often rather keep uncertainty than risk disappointment. The irony is that uncertainty is usually what makes the problem feel so large in the first place. When something stays vague for long enough, your imagination starts filling in the blanks. The exam feels bigger, the material feels scarier, and the entire challenge starts looking more overwhelming than it really is. Not because anything actually changed, but because you never gave reality a chance to correct the story. That is why I do not think the solution is motivation. Motivation is unreliable. Some days you have it, and some days you do not. Waiting until you feel ready is just another way of waiting, and if you have already spent weeks avoiding the material, you probably know that readiness is not coming. The real turning point is much smaller. Instead of asking yourself how to finish the entire subject, ask yourself what information you are avoiding. Maybe it is one chapter, one topic, or even one practice question. The goal is not to master everything tonight. The goal is to stop guessing. Because one ugly attempt tells you more than another hour of worrying. One practice question tells you more than another study plan. And one chapter tells you more than another evening spent imagining how bad the situation might be. Reality may not always be pleasant, but it is much easier to work with than uncertainty. You cannot solve an imaginary problem. You can only solve a real one. And that is why the first step matters. Not because it magically fixes everything, but because it replaces assumptions with evidence. For days or weeks, maybe even months, you have been asking the same question. How bad is it? The first real attempt finally gives you an answer. And once you have an answer, you can do something with it. Maybe the situation is bad, but at least now you know what you are dealing with. Maybe it is better than you expected. Either way, you are no longer guessing. Uncertainty has finally been replaced with information. You are no longer dealing with speculation. You are finally dealing with something real. And reality is where progress starts. And the strange thing is that subjects often become less scary once you finally face them. Not because they become easier, because they stop being imaginary. The chapter is no longer a mysterious threat hiding somewhere in the future. It is just a chapter. The exam is no longer a giant undefined problem. It becomes a specific problem with specific gaps that can be identified, understood, and worked on. That does not make the work disappear, but it makes the work visible. And visible problems are easier to solve than invisible ones. So if you are avoiding studying right now, maybe the problem is not laziness. Maybe you are protecting yourself from information you are afraid to see. The problem is that the information you are avoiding is exactly the information you need. Because eventually not knowing becomes more exhausting than knowing. And the subject gets a lot less scary when it stops being imaginary.